Let's get it started.
Double O.
Think like a rapper.
Check 1 2. You are back with your boy Double O, and this is Think Like a Rapper, episode 108. Today on the podcast, we have my homie Netic, entrepreneur, rapper, game rebellion leader, in general a cult leader, and also the person who helped kick off Free Range, the original podcast, with me. If you've listened to that episode, then you know that in these times, Netic is one of the most important people that you actually need to speak to, because it seems like he's been preparing for this chaos for his entire life. So I wanted to jump on Zoom with him and talk about how he's been dealing with it. I found it interesting that even someone as prepared can still admit that they had blind spots, because as much as you can prep for situations like this, everything changes when you get punched in the mouth. So we talk about how he's dealing with everything, how he needs to improve on preparation for something worse or at least something as bad. We talk about what this might mean at a larger scale for the country and for the world, whether it's actually the end of the Industrial Revolution and this is the final nail in the coffin, and kind of what we think happens next, and how hip-hop educated us and prepared us for these moments. Think like a rapper. What up, world? It is episode 108 of the Think Like a Rapper podcast. It feels like, for some reason, even though I always do this on Skype, I feel like I'm on the weird pirate radio version of the podcast now because I'm in Zoom and it just says it's recording. It's got the little encrypted thing on there. How are you doing? Doing all right?
I'm fantastic. I mean, it's as fantastic as one can be given the circumstances, you know.
Yeah, you were just saying that you were that you're getting stronger by the day.
Yeah.
What? No. So what were you saying?
No, I mean, that's definitely an accurate sort of description of what's going on over here on my end. I'm just really taking this time to dial in and just sort of focus on the areas that I could focus on, not just physically stronger, but also taking the opportunity to be more mentally stronger and flexible. Trying to figure out what I'm going to do on the other side of this, you know, anticipating what the other side looks like.
Yeah, because I wanted to talk to you today because you kicked off the original version of the podcast with me, and I felt like there's always been this conversation preparing for this moment.
Yeah.
And now we're in it, and now it's a very interesting sort of place, because I think even at least in my sort of imaginings of Terminator 2 Judgment Day, I don't know if this was the version that I was thinking that it was kind of going to be. But it is a very interesting sort of test of the system regardless. And I guess my first question is how are you feeling about it? You have been one of these people that I know that's been prepping for the system to fall apart. And now we're in this really weird space where a lot of the system has fallen apart, but it's still maintained. It's still being, boxed in at this, even if it's bursting at the seams, and kind of what your just take on the whole situation is.
Yeah. I mean, well, one, it's I think it's definitely an indicator of the fact that no matter what you think you're preparing for, you're not prepared. So the only thing you really can prepare for is change. And I guess the best way to do that is to really work on being, flexible, biologically flexible, physically flexible, emotionally flexible, having some sort of sense of balance and flexibility so that you can change with the environment as the environment changes. Because like you said, I don't think that this isn't necessarily how I envisioned it either. And I don't even know if I have an answer for how I envisioned it. But as it becomes reality, you're like realizing all the areas where you had blind spots and, and where you didn't prepare in a particular way. I guess for me, I'm a little bit perturbed with myself in terms of the fact that I didn't sort of like prepare my family with a farm and a centralized location and everybody knows where to go and what that looks like. And, and I don't think, I genuinely don't think that this is like the apocalypse.
Oh yeah.
So I'm not operating from that space either, where I'm like real too worried about it. Although I for sure think people are suffering, and a lot of the fact that I'm not too worried about it is tied to the fact that I'm not too affected by it. Like, although I think I know 4 people who've died from the virus, or complications associated with the virus. I know way more people that have it, you know what I'm saying, that are fine and dealing with it and getting over it. Like my old neighbor, like I think like 4 people in his immediate family, he had it, he's older, and then his son got it, his wife got it. Like it was just like, and they all kind of just like battled it like a pneumonia. And then I have other friends whose grandfathers passed away, whose uncles passed away, things of this nature. But I immediately am not really affected by it in the same way. I haven't lost my, like too many of my sources of income haven't been affected. Obviously.
Yeah, I actually want to talk a little bit about that. But where I wanted to go was, what were the people often look to you, right, as being this sort of like, man, he knows what's going to happen. He sees the matrix code and is able to operate, being prepared for it. So what were those blind spots that you talked about earlier that you would like immediately were like, shit, this is not together. This is not together.
I mean, the major one for me is, really was like the amount of guns and ammo, and living on the East Coast in a blue state area. And I'm like, bad idea. Like very quickly got to a place where I was like, no, this was unnecessary. One, because I don't have to live anywhere. Like I'm the type of person that really can operate my business from wherever I need to operate it. And the sort of one of my latest ventures affords me the opportunity to live in like a very purple state, which has very lax gun laws, and I chose not to. Like I was like, oh, I'll still, I'll live in my comfort zone, and I think I was a little bit upset with myself for not sort of like taking advantage of the opportunity that I had to be in more of just sort of like a state that makes opportunities, that really protects the Second Amendment. Like I think that for me was a major takeaway, where I was like, yo, no, I clearly cannot trust the government to take care of myself or my family, or protect me or my family or my loved ones. And if that's the case, then I don't want to be in a place where the government isn't like super pro people protecting themselves. So, and it is glaringly obvious the lack of competency in our infrastructure on state levels, and then on a larger federal level. I mean, it's criminal. And you saw, I don't know if you saw like de Blasio and Nancy Pelosi talking about like, yeah, go about your business. There's no need to panic. Go to Chinatown, eat out, support your local businesses. Literally, they're telling people to do the worst possible. I mean, it's just actually criminal. Like, they all should step down. Like, they really should just be like, yo, we got it wrong. And us getting it wrong wasn't just like a level of negligence. There's a level of danger. And if you look at the death rate in New York, in the areas that they served and said this, it's the highest in the country. So it's a criminal act. You can't yell fire in a crowded area, right? It's a criminal act. It's you create mass hysteria. Or so if you do that in one way, I think that's criminal act. And if you do it in the other way by not telling people what the fuck is going on, that's also a criminal act. So that would be the first one that was like super obvious to me. And then the second one was about, like I said, about the farm situation, where I was like, you know what? I really should have just bought a farm. Even if it was just one that was like, just sort of like a vacation rental farm that, sort of everybody could have chipped in a little bit of money and we could have made it happen. But at least it would have been a neutral place, within a 3-hour radius of New York City or a 4-hour radius of New York City that allows, my immediate family and loved ones to have a centralized location where they can say, listen, I don't know what's going on, but fuck it. Let's just go on permanent spring vacation until otherwise notified, So that was the other one. Those were the two like ones that I most was like, yeah, I made, like, I get it. Like, I still love art. I love fashion. I love design. I love those things, but I don't care about them in a way that would make me sacrifice my true loved ones and the things that I truly value. So I don't need to be centrally located to those things as much as I need to provide my family and loved ones with a centralized location in which they can escape to.
Yeah. Speaking of that, I feel like we're in this, having only lived in major cities, for me, only living in LA and New York, and never really thinking about living anywhere else, wanting to vacation in certain other places. But like, I feel like now that the world is shut down, and especially the major cities are shut down, it's putting a whole different perspective on living in one, right? Because once you take away all of the, like you said, like all the cultural stuff that you like, when you realize, oh, I'm just stuck in a 5x5 basement apartment in Bushwick, and then, I can't go anywhere. It changes how New York feels. And I wanted to get your thoughts on that, because you similarly live in, you're a city dweller. You spend your time sometimes in the countryside, but you spend a lot of time in cities. Like, has that changed, especially knowing now there's like, oh, I need at least a place to retreat to? Or are you fully thinking like, maybe I don't even need to be in a city anymore at this point?
Well, I mean, I don't live in the city. I mean, I think when I left Brooklyn and went to LA, I was officially over it. Like, and I didn't even know that I was officially over it until I came back to New York and had to do some like work in New York, I think around the podcast or something. But it was like being in LA, and LA is a weird city because it's pretty spread out, but it also has these pockets of nature that you can like interact with. Like in LA, you can go on a hike in the morning, go to a meeting in the afternoon, and then go to the beach in the, like in the late afternoon, early evening. And literally you can do all of those things in one day and have like a crazy diverse experience, like environmental experience. And I really appreciated that about LA, and because you drive, you also have that sort of freedom where it doesn't feel like you're just like stuck in this, like you're not so stuck. You do learn very quickly that you don't actually want to go nowhere when you get to LA. Like, you don't want to go anywhere. You don't want to see anybody. You don't want to, because of the fact that you're driving. But I do know like LA sort of that it kickstarted this feeling for me that I was like missing something in New York City. And then when I came back to New York to work on the podcast or the TV show, I don't remember what I was working on at the time, but I had to like keep coming back to New York. And I just was like, nah, you guys don't even know what you're missing. And I think you kind of I think you kind of sparked that because you went to LA before me. And I think you sort of had like alluded to that where you kind of like, where you're like, dude, it's way freer. You know what I'm saying? Like out here than it is in New York. And there's way more opportunity for you to figure it out because you can actually breathe a second. Like you get and so I remember that conversation and like agreeing, but I was more so agreeing in like the theoretical, philosophical sense. And then going back to New York and being like, oh, 100%, like this isn't it. Like I wasn't on the grind in New York. I was being ground up. I was in the grinder. You know what I'm saying? Like that's, to me, feels like the difference. Like you're young and you have some energy and you go to New York and you think like, okay, cool. Or you're from New York and you're like, yo, I'm going to take advantage of this city and blah, 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 and its opportunities. And, there's so many different diverse people and I love New York, but you quickly realize like, yo, the cost of living is so astronomical that you can't really create art. Like it's almost impossible to create art. And then because you got to figure out a way to survive, to live, and art, in order to make art, you have to make mistakes. But if you can't afford to make mistakes, like if you can't afford to be wrong with your art 3-4 months in a row, then you're going to stop producing art and start making product. You know what I'm saying? So you're going to go into this thing like, okay, well, what the fuck sells? Which I think is, sort of why New York hip hop got a little bit stagnant as well. Cause we just like sort of looked like, what can we sell? What sells? Other than some people like, like Joey Badass and, there's whole, Bushwick Zombies and all those dudes, they sort of carved out their own niche and like created a whole like 90s throwback vibe, which then expanded into its own sort of thing. In the whole pro era camp. But other than that, it's like we were always trying to like, I guess like post ever since 50, it was like people were trying to like see what was hot and what was popping and just do a New York version of that. You know what I mean? And I think that that's just part of what happens when you're in the hustle of New York because it's so expensive. So you're just trying to figure out how to make what sells. And I'm not really interested in that. So for me, I was done. Like I was ready to go.
Yeah. But I mean, all major cities, including LA, like including Philly, including like, does it feel now that, once you take away again, the fancy frills around them, that it's just like, oh yeah, in the end, if the government is just like, yeah, this stuff is closed, this place is not, none of its benefits exist.
Oh yeah, listen, if you can't, I mean, honestly, back to that shit, like if you can't grow anything, then it's kind of like useless. Like if you don't have the ability to like grow food and gather water, I mean, in a case of like the government shutting down or like something shutting down, then yeah, it's fucking like, it's absolutely 100% a inconvenience on the nice end, like, and deadly on the other side. So I'm completely uninterested in living sort of that city life. I think that it's important to have access to it, especially, like for people like you and I and, but right now I think that part of this thing that we're experiencing is the true revolution and the technological revolution and understanding that, the industrial age is really over. Like, it's not like a talking point anymore. It's done. Your little brick and mortar mom and pop shop is irrelevant and it doesn't matter and it does not survive. You're done. Like we are moving into the information age and the technology age, and we're putting a close to the industrial age. Like it's over. Like I don't want people to get it twisted and think that it's like an allusion to it being over, or like we're hypothetically talking about it being over. Like, no, it is completely over. Like it's all the way over. And now what is going to be a matter of like, how do you capitalize off of the information that you have? How do you capitalize off of the technology that you have access to? How do you capitalize in those ways, shapes and forms? And I think that this situation is way bigger than what people are alluding to in terms of, I mean, I see all the noise, like, like I get all of the conspiracy theory noise, like that shit comes through my channel all day long. People are constantly sending me that stuff. But I mean, for me, I think at this point, I've been doing this long enough where I'm able to sort of disseminate the signal from the noise pretty quickly and see where there are valid points in this sort of conspiracy hypothesis area, and then where it's sort of like just wild logical fallacies and just like real like weak, just like weak arguments and undermined non-critical thought positioning. So I do still think that it's much, much bigger than people are like even coming to understand. And that it's like, I don't know the last time we talked about it, but I obviously was sort of leveraged in a lot of cryptocurrencies, and, I still was like working on properties that I was, getting in Philadelphia and different areas, things of this nature, but for me, it's like all of these things that I was doing was because I understood that there was a shift that was happening and has been happening for a very long time. Like fiat currency cannot maintain itself. Both economists on the left and the right both have been discussing the idea of a UBI and what it looks like, universal basic income, and what that looks like. And once that's the case, when it's sort of a bipartisan conversation, you already know like, oh, it has to happen. It's just a matter of how it becomes introduced, and a lot of times or automation or AI or, artificial intelligence, CRISPR, all of these type of things that, like were part of things that I was involved in working on or thinking about a few years ago. It's like I already knew they were coming in some way, shape, or form. I just didn't know how they were going to roll it. Like, how are you going to roll it out? Because there's going to be pushback and people are going to feel a certain way. But the best way to roll it out is to get people to need it. You know what I mean? Like, because sometimes if they don't want it, that's cool, but then make it a need, and then they'll start asking for it,
Yeah, it's a very interesting thing to, even in the short term, obviously the UBI sort of conversation has happened for a little while, but let's say it becomes super famous with somebody like Andrew Yang, and you get sort of this political cycle leading to the 2020 election where you have, Bernie talking to the Medicare for All sort of conversation, Andrew Yang talking to UBI, and even, very sort of whatever the politically astute Democratic nominees being like, oh yeah, that can work, but not that way. And then obviously the right side being like, nah, that'll never work because you don't want people sucking on the teat of the government. And then you get this biological bomb that gets dropped on the world, and all of a sudden it's just like, you know what we should do? That exact thing that we said that we don't have money for, that we don't that doesn't make sense, that will be, all of those things. And it's so funny now because how do you come back from this? For those people, for the people on the right that were just like, no, this isn't the way that it should be. You just gave everybody that, and it's going to be very hard to go back and say, oh, we can't do that again because we don't have the money. It's just like, wait a minute, your money just popped up out of nowhere, right, and, and covered all this stuff.
I mean, I don't know. I guess for me, well, one, I think there's a lot of layers to what's happening right now. There's some there's some very real issues that have to be addressed in terms of like where we were in the 5G conversation as a country comparatively to where China was. That was something that had to be addressed. Our dependency on China in terms of tech and what we were going to do if we were to catch up, and if we were going to allow China to sort of come in and have their technologies be a part of our 5G expansion with, like that was a real conversation that needed to be had and also needed to be honest. Like, and the problem is that when you get too sensitive, when you get to a space where ideology, influences logic, it's dangerous because it's like at the extent of like, or at the expense of not sounding like a racist, you allow fucking, a foreign national agency to come in and fucking like take over all your shit. And it's like, well, at least we weren't racist. It's like, yeah, but now we're fucking slaves to those people that you didn't want to be fucking racist to. Like, what are you talking about? Like, there has to be some reasonable measures that counteract being like recognizing the importance of what it is that we value and what we're calling our sort of like what it is that makes us a nation state and what we value about that, and then what we're willing to do to protect it. And I think a lot of times, like, we've gotten to this place where like the intellectuals have occupied a space. Well, I don't even know if they're that intellectual. I don't know what it is, but it's like a real weird sort of thing that happened in the liberal left. And I know what it is. I know when you're a victim for so long, you want to be protected. You want to feel protected. So you start to like really, really, ask for those protections. And then you lash out at anything that appears to be a threat. But the reality is that sometimes you need to like really be conscientious and make sure that we're not, exposing ourselves in ways that puts us really at danger.
Yeah. I mean, you look at the very real scenario where it's like, not that, even though obviously the right is in charge, but very early on, there probably should have been some sort of travel restrictions, that happened really, really quickly once we saw that this thing was a very real, a very real potential for a pandemic, because it's just super obvious that the only way to keep something from really, getting here and getting crazy is to have to shut down sort of travel, because we are a global society, whether we want to admit it or not. And the only way to keep that thing from coming over here is to keep it out. And
absolutely. I mean, I don't think you can even really figure out a way to keep it completely out. But I do think that you get to a space where you're like mitigating risk, and in order to do that, again, I also think this problem is layered because there's a competency issue where, we don't have a system that is based on like a competency hierarchy. We have a system that's based on like a cronyism hierarchy, and also some like weird sort of like meritocracy that's not really based on merit of competency, but merit of like what school did you go to and who you hung out with, you know what I'm saying? Like, and where, and it's just kind of, that's not really the best way to set up a dominance hierarchy scale, or a hierarchy scale in general. But I think it should really be from a space of competency. And the problem is that we've been protecting. The idea of being politically correct is like so fucking dangerous that we've got to like we really need to re-examine that. But it's so layered. Like America put itself at this. America is nothing more than its people, but America put itself in this weird position where it's sort of, for so long, it lied and didn't acknowledge its wrongdoings in certain ways, and didn't get like, it was like the evil stepmother to a certain group of people for so long, and then would just deny that it was that way. And then America is like, the children who America did treat well would also deny that the other stepchildren were being mistreated. So as a result, you got a bunch of people who are American that don't actually associate themselves with America, or don't fully feel comfortable associating themselves with America. So they're not really helping to push America to be all that she can be until they get acknowledged. When they're saying like, listen, acknowledge me and I'm down. Like, I'm down to like be in the foxhole with you and, and do some of this fucking legwork and do whatever needs to be done and put in my sweat equity. But if you don't acknowledge that I'm here and that you've been mistreating me for mad long, like, fuck you then. So you have that sort of like underlying current of America from like it's before it was America, like you have every Native individual that I talk to feels like that. For the most part, every Black person I talk to, unless they're like, unless they're super smart or wildly patriotic and like ex-military or police or something. For the most part, it's like they kind of feel like that too. But what we have to recognize is that America is a superpower. And when you travel the world, the more you travel the world, the more you understand like why it's important that America be a superpower in the world if you're one from America or a person of color in America. Because what you don't want to be is like a person of color and Russia be the fucking superpower of the world. And what you don't want to be is a person of color and fucking China be the superpower of the world. Because the fact that there's even a Black Lives Matter conversation only happens in America. That only happens in America. The fact that like a Colin Kaepernick conversation can be had only happens in America. It doesn't happen in Russia. Russia will fuck up Russians that look exactly like them. Like Russians will fuck up Russia doesn't care. Russia will fuck you up, right? All the way up. If you get out of line, you know what I'm saying? Like you rap the wrong song, you say the wrong lyrics, you do Russia will fuck you up. China does not give a fuck. Like China will fuck Chinese people up. So you go ahead and try to start a little Black Lives Matter movement in China and see how that goes, right? See how it goes starting a Black Lives Matter conversation in Russia. That's not to let the fucking, the superpower of America off the hook in terms of what it's done to people of color or Black people, but it's to say that, do you want to be able to sit at the table with a person that will actually hear what you're saying in some way, shape, or form, or do you want to sit at the table where as soon as you open your mouth, they fucking put a gun in it and shoot you?
Yeah, there's
it's a different. I don't know. It's just something that we have to really take in consideration and be like, okay, so who are we actually willing to concede to?
Yeah, there's a weird. I feel that same way oftentimes about when people talk about the extremes in sort of all the political conversations, right? Where they're kind of like, oh, these people are the lesser of two evils, or this person's just as bad as this person, yada, 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 because they have this rap sheet that is also not, that is not squeaky clean. And you're like, at the end of the day, what it comes down to is, America, for all its faults, is, even in history, the only 300 million plus huge landmass, multicultural society that, while it may not be perfect, is somehow surviving in this weird making up shit as we go along sort of of way. Yeah. But that doesn't mean that you don't hold its feet to the fire to make it better, right? And you choose to do that, or you choose to say, fuck it, let the whole shit fall apart, when it's like, do you really want the whole shit to fall apart? Motherfuckers were fighting over toilet paper, and you could still go to the grocery store the next day. Do you really want to know what it's like when the grocery store is done? When people got to fight for meat out of garbage cans or things like that? Do you really want that?
It's a limited conversation. You don't want to be 14% of the population. You know what I'm saying? Like, you don't want to be 14% of the population and shit hit the fan, because you are in the least strongest position to actually do anything about shit hitting the fan. It's like, you want to be the creature comforts of America that we enjoy, even on the lowest end of the spectrum, are better than the creature comforts of the medium end of the spectrum in these other spaces, especially places. I guess I could give you like a real-time example. So just between December and January, within a month, I had been to like 4 different countries. Mm-hmm. And one, to show the unpreparedness of America, like the only screening that ever happened where people was like, were you in China? And I was like, no. Like, did you come in contact with anybody from China? No, I don't think so. Okay, cool. You can go ahead. Like, that was basically the the conversation in terms of like screening me getting into these countries and out of these countries. That being said, I do not feel safe with low-level corruption that can touch me. Like when I'm in Brazil, I am concerned about the police, like in a way that I'm not concerned about the police in America. And I know all the stats, around police violence in America, police killings of black and brown men in America. I got all that shit. You know what? I never feel shook the way that I am when I'm in Brazil or when I'm in Mexico. I never get pulled over in America and think to myself, this cop is going to extort me and, might try to get me to pay $700 to get out of this, to get out of getting pulled over, and then worry about it happening like 20 more miles down the road. That's a real thing when I'm in Mexico. That's a very real thing that happens, where every single person that I know who's gone to Mexico has been extorted by the police or attempted to be extorted by the police in some way, shape, or form. On a consistent basis. And the reason that happens is because the corruption is low, it's low level corruption. It's there's not a singular unit that is operating on a high level and dealing with massive corporate corruption, massive scales of corruption on a global enterprise way, it's got low level corruption happening on every single level. So it's the police are corrupt. The mayor is corrupt. The councilman is corrupt. The city council is corrupt. Every single layer is corrupt, all the way through and through. And it's because nobody is sitting there being yo, what happened? No. That's not how you're not doing that shit. I'll stomp a mud hole in your ass. America's corruption is extremely sophisticated, and how it reaches the everyday person is in this type of shit where it's oh, you're going to stay home. Well, why are we staying home? Because it's dangerous. Are you sure it's dangerous? Yeah, we're sure. And then people do a little bit of research and they're well, it doesn't seem as dangerous as they're making it seem. What's going on? You're I don't like this. What America's trying to tell us what to do. And you're yeah. Just stay your ass at home though. We know you don't like it. But it's not like China coming and welding your door shut. You know what I'm saying? And putting a perimeter fence around it and saying, yo, if you cross this perimeter, we are going to shoot you. Oh, you're outside? I'm going to snatch you off the street. Cool. Now, we're going to disappear you. These are, and that's not to, that's not to even say that way is wrong, right? If you want to effectively quarantine someplace, that's really what a fucking quarantine is, right? So I'm trying to be careful and make sure that I'm not downplaying one over the other. I'm saying what I'm more comfortable with and what I feel better about. I like the fact that, I can talk about being uncomfortable about living in a blue state and saying you know what, when this shit is done, I'm out. I'm going to a red state. I'm going to a red state so that I can, and I'm going to make sure that I, do everything in my power to protect my Second Amendment right, because I don't like the idea of depending on our government in that way, shape, or form. I can only do that because of our government. You know what I'm saying? Because of the way that this shit is played out. So it's it's a weird reality, but it's one that we're sort of faced with. And to me, it's it's nice for me to go on vacation in these places. And it's nice for me to even experience the discomfort of the corruption of these places. But again, I can do all of that with a little bit of comfort in the fact that it's yeah, but I'm American and they don't want those problems. Right? They don't want, this is no bullshit. I've snatched my ID back from cops that were trying to take it back to the station. And I've been yo, fuck it. Do whatever you got to do, but you're not taking my ID. Whatever. And they are oh, you're going to get arrested. We're going to and I'm yo, I'm not getting arrested. I'm going in the fucking car. I'm tired of this shit. If you want to shoot me, shoot me. You're going to have a dead American on your hands. You have to deal with that. And but that only happens because because they're that level of corrupt, and then America is that level of gangster, where I'm nah, I got enough of a following and fan base that people are going to ask too many questions, and it's going to make a response in some way, shape, or form from some authorities, and you're not going to want those problems. I can lean on that in a certain way. So I don't know. It's a situation that I really wish America would use this opportunity to really address its racial shit for real, so that it could get people of color on board in a way that makes America super powerful.
Do you think that is really what keeps we keep pussyfooting around the real issue? So you get the sort of PC conversation, the political correct sort of conversation, which often is led not even by people of color, right? It's often like super white liberals that are just like, no, you can't say that, you can't do this, you can't. Like, do you think that if we were to just straight up be able to have the sort of, as Dave Chappelle talked about, like the reconciliation, the way that they did it in South Africa, right, where you have these people come up and just talk about what the state has done and really accept its wrongs. Do you think that is still what's keeping us from really moving forward? It's this sort of, it's the 800-pound gorilla that's always keeping the larger American idea from truly kind of realizing it itself.
I don't know if it's the only thing that's keeping us from it. I know that I think America has an existential crisis dilemma because it talks about itself in terms of like equal opportunity in the land of the free. And then when we want to have a conversation, about equality and equity without really being honest on both ends of what that means, right? Like the average white person didn't own slaves, right? Like very, very few white people in America owned slaves. Very many white people in America had the opportunities allotted to them as a result of being white in America, had opportunities allotted to them as a result of being white in America. But it wasn't like every white person wasn't, like killing Native Americans and forcing them onto reservations. You know what I'm saying? Like that, although there was a systemic sort of push for those things to happen, and there was a systemic push for those lands that were being taken from natives to be allocated towards crop growth, and then slaves would work that land, so which then made America the richest country in the world. But like the elite of America, the white elite of America didn't give a fuck about the average white American. It just so happened that they looked more like the average white American. So those people benefited a little bit more in terms of like over people of color. But I mean, Irish didn't have it fucking easy in America. No. Italians coming over here, did not have it easy in America in the beginning. And I think we need to be more honest with all of our conversations so that we can get to a space where we can kind of like stop. We can stop sort of like having these fantastical, like Harry Potter conversations that we're like, where we're using magic and mysticism to like retell history. And that's for everybody, fucking like, white people, black people, like we need to recognize that, look, there are winners and losers in particular spaces in history. And it doesn't just mean like body counts, right? Like you can win a war and still suffer the like psychological impact that war had on you, even from winning. So it doesn't, I'm not saying it to say like, oh, this, they need to examine this, like, because like, well, get over it. We won, you know what I'm saying? Like white people won, you guys lost, get over it. Like, nope, that's not what I'm saying. But I am saying like, look, the reality is that there's a lot of spaces in which if you're looking at it from a game theory stance, they did win. And anything that we ask of them is us asking the winners to be like, to give us like consolation prizes. And I'm like, that's not really my style, just as a human, that's just not my shit. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm just the type of person is like, I don't think anybody owes me anything, and I think that a lot of the ideas that circle around what the conversation around race and what you're talking about, like reconciling some of these issues, come out of the moral stance that America takes on what it is. And it's like, well, if America keeps selling itself as this moral high ground of a place and this, this morally or intrinsically moral space, then it does then have to take issue with its immorality around its racial history, its sexual history in terms of its sexism, its current incarceration practices, its current justice system practices. It's like, and that makes it problematic because it's like, yo, if you didn't say it's almost like to be like, I feel like I'm very patriotic. And the reason I feel like I'm very patriotic is because I want America to be all that it claims it is. So I want to hold it to that standard where it's like, yo, yeah, be that shit, because I'm down to call myself an American. But as soon as you are like showing up as that thing that you're saying you are, this land of liberty and opportunity and equality and all that shit, hell yeah, that sounds awesome. Where's that? Where's that place? But I have to, at the same time, I have to be honest about the fact that, again, I don't really know how much of that isn't true, right? Like, I do know that there's major issues in terms of like how they redlined areas. We always talk about this, like that being like a really massive sort of underdevelopment of wealth building opportunity is like when you redline neighborhoods and you stop people from buying homes, then you take away their ability to like have compounded equity, and you take away their ability to take loan against that asset, which then limits what their sort of economic investment opportunities are moving forward. Like those are real tangible things that you can point to and be like, no, this fucked up a lot of people. You know what I'm saying? So like every person that applied for a bank loan that you said no to, even though they were deserving of that bank loan, that's a real space where you can target like institutions as a result of like their practices. There's like real places where racism can be a very, very tangible sort of conversation and not some sort of etherical feeling that we all have experienced and all know to be true, but it's still very personal, right? Like it's a very personal thing that isn't quantified in a way that can really be like, have like a hard number attached to. And
yeah,
for me, it bothered. I don't know, it becomes a little funny style there.
No. I think we had touched on this before, where you were talking about in the first podcast, where we were talking about kind of like everybody being worried about the non-systematic, the sort of like slights of racism and being overly offended by that, while the actual structural things that are keeping you in fucked up scenarios or keeping the larger group in fucked up scenarios continue to exist because no one really puts their efforts towards addressing those things. Some people do, let's be clear. But like if everybody focused on those things and dismantling those sort of ideas and less about whether you got called a name or not, there is, you'd hope that there would actually be some sort of structural change. But it's always so weird to me. It's always so funny, and we always end up in this rabbit hole when it comes to sort of the ideals of America and its exceptionalism or pseudo exceptionalism. Is this idea that like, wouldn't you want ultimately there is this weird, and I don't know if it's a part of the system, which is like, if you want exponential growth of capitalism, if you want this very placated and happy sort of society, then it would almost make sense to make sure that the bottom at least feels better, right, inherently than they may actually be, which is kind of what the middle class was for so many years, right? Like the consumer class is always spending all this money on stuff, even though they really can't afford it, but they're able to exist at this line that allows society to continue. And we see how when that consumer class literally comes to a halt, that without it, it doesn't exist. It would almost make sense that like going back into restarting the experiment, because we're in this weird place where it is kind of paused, right? We're just like hoping it gets going again, is that you would want at least the people at the bottom, or the people who felt like they're at the bottom, or the people who felt like they're left out, to be included in the moral conversation and the the equality conversation, because all of it is necessary and all of it is just beneficial to the idea as a whole. It's a really weird scenario still that there is, and this is where racism becomes very interesting, because it feels like it's directly opposed to the capitalist structure that you would want
right
more people to feel good about, and at least spending money in the system and doing this sort of this feeling that they're moving on their way up. You'd want as many people to feel like that, then feel like they're left out of the situation, because that keeps the engine just humming all the time, as opposed to having this group of people and new groups of immigrants and obviously Native American population that feel like, at any moment I can just tap out of this game because clearly they don't give a fuck. And it's just like, that seems backwards to the capitalist sort of idea. And, when it comes down to it, but I don't know if it'll happen after this. You can only hope that something would change.
Something might give. Yeah. I don't know if it's even an issue for capitalism, because people do keep spending what they have.
Yeah.
For the most part. I think when you start talking about a unified, when you start talking about a sort of like a unified front in terms of defense, it's a better conversation, because people don't engage in the idea of defending the nation in the same way. And people don't engage in the idea of defending community in the same way, or being a part of sort of like a homogenizing of what America is, right? So it's like, so people of color are reluctant to participate in be cops or participating in this in society in the way that you claim that you want them to. And it's like, well, we would if we believed that you really wanted us to. And if you know what I'm saying? And if you kind of like held a little bit of your side of the bargain up in terms of for example, I never understand why the conservative right doesn't just embrace going after cops that blatantly kill people of color. Not cops, not like police, but like bad police officers, right? It's like, so the person who steps up and is like, no, I don't give a fuck. I love the police. I do not fuck with bad cops at all. I fuck with amazing police officers, and I understand that the policing is an incredibly difficult job and blah, 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 blah. All the right speaking points. But then it's like, and if you fuck up and shoot a 12-year-old in 2.2 seconds of opening the car door, you are going to jail for murder. And I do not give a fuck. Like, that shit is whack. Unacceptable. You're a rat. You handcuff somebody and throw him in a van, and he breaks his neck because of your reckless driving. You're going to jail. Like, that shit is whack. Instantly, you're going to start having people be like, yo, I fuck with this guy, right? Like the Fox News commentator that gets on and says, yo, 6 cops putting a chokehold on a overweight dude in Staten Island is unnecessary. That's murder, right? Like, all of a sudden, people of color are going to start fucking with that particular host. You know what I'm saying? Or that Fox News anchor or whoever that guy is that stepped up and said that shit. It's like, we live in a time where you can afford to be divergent in a little way, because your personal following and your personal branding can outpace your current position, right? Like Fox News isn't mainstream media anymore. CNBC isn't mainstream media. They call it that, but that's not what it is. Because if you look at Joe Rogan's YouTube numbers and you look at Fox News YouTube numbers, Joe Rogan is where the mainstream is going, right? Like more people are going to Joe Rogan for fucking news. More people are going to YouTube and these sort of, like these influential individuals for their information. So they're just using the term mainstream, but it's not the mainstream anymore. So building your personal brand by being like an authentic human who actually can like have ideas is a much better business play and a much smarter way to unify a collective audience that is really, really diverse, which all the companies are looking for. Like if you're able to fucking reach, if I'm able to reach 19-year-old black kids and 50-year-old white men, I'm killing. I'm killing the game, right? Like that's amazing. So for me, it's like if I can have a conversation and bridge the gap between those two fucking demographics, I win. I don't care what my current job situation is. I know where we're going as a society, and I know we're moving into an information age. And if I'm able to deliver information to a large demographic, whether you recognize it as valuable, Fox, CNN, whoever, like that's irrelevant because I know where we're going and I know that that's valuable. So I'll take my fucking audience with me. And I just don't understand why we're not getting in more into that space. And that's sort of what I'm looking to do and sort of looking to be, is a space where a place where we can have really, really difficult conversations. I want to provide a space where we don't just the cancel culture doesn't really exist. It's like, no, this is the conversation culture over here. You can have the cancel culture because I don't want that. Like, I want to be able to have really, really bad ideas feel free to voice themselves in a space where really, really good ideas exist, so that hopefully the really good ideas can convert those bad ideas into better ideas, right? The only way bad ideas are going to get better is if we allow them to like be exchanged on an open market.
Yeah, they need to be iterated. You need to feel free enough to have your opinion and not worry about it being judged, in an effort that maybe what you're going to get back at a base level is a certain level of respect, right? Like the person doesn't just be like, that's a piece of shit. They're just like, I get why you might think that, but are you also thinking about X, Y, Z? Then it allows that person to iterate on the bad idea. And then you hopefully get, like you said, to this real, solid, functional idea that can actually move forward the group and whoever is iterating it at the time. I do wonder if this transition that we're going through will allow for that sort of conversation or that sort of freedom to happen, because what we're, like you said before, and I want to touch on this, what you think will happen next, but like this really being the nail in the coffin for the industrial revolution as an age and idea. When you talk about those cops, good cops, bad cops, when you talk about people that are, pundits, people working at Fox News and all that sort of stuff, everyone's so used to the story of the structure that they're in or the tribe that they're a part of. Right. And I feel like, what happens now is a lot of that story is getting stripped away. Like all those people, all the times where, your boss at whatever news station was like, nah, you can't, you have to be in here every day to do this work, or you have to do this every day. It's like, wait a minute, I can run an entire news thing from my home office. Like right. we could have been done this. Like we already had the system to do this. Or cops, the love for the blue, being put into the situation where it's like, oh yeah, but we're still going to throw you into the middle of the shit without any sort of protective gear, without any sort of PPE, without any sort, like, where you still have to deal with people in a very intimate way every single day. That, yeah, but you're risking your life for, you know, $50,000 a year.
Yeah.
Like, is that really worth it? Is it really worth it now the next time that your partner or your colleague does some bullshit? Is it really worth it to sit to hold the line? And when you know at the end of the day, when the shit hits a fan, that nobody has your back, actually, you know,
Right.
like.
Well, I mean, I think that's also, I mean, one of my initial ideas in terms of like, how do we hold police accountable was to create sort of like a fund that was like a defense fund for People's Defense Fund that was constantly being like given to, and sort of forcing communities to say like, okay, if next time some shit goes down in the community, like pony up the dollars so that we can go after the cops, like go after the police officer's pension, like, or let's go after the police officer's like his personal stake. Like, let's try to let's get him in civil court, but we're going to stretch this out, him as a person, and let's have like, see if how much money we can continuously have towards this cause. Like, not the talk, not the chatter, but like, let's see what people's personal liability, how their personal liability stands up. And when the cops see that the force has the force's back, but not the individual's back, I think that changes the conversation. So that was one of my first ideas in terms of like what it looks like. And then I started thinking like, well, how do we do that? Okay, I'll do a nonprofit organization, but we need to figure out ways for profit, like for-profit ventures to be financed. So I came up with this whole like theory around that. And then I was like, there's also another side of it, because that it still keeps us in this us versus them space. And I don't think that that's the best place for us to be. And we need to be looking at this much more strategically than that, and recognize that like police aren't really going anywhere, and racism will probably, the way that racism looks in terms of like what it looks like right now will probably go somewhere very quickly because of CRISPR, and because of our ability to sort of gene edit, and because of what, you know, like if you actually look, like you don't know what fucking Kylie Jenner is, you know what I'm saying? Like if you like and then there's like a whole slew of human beings that are literally look like her, you know what I'm saying? And that are trying to look like her. And I think that that's just a precursor of where we're going in terms of look. I think not that people are going to look like Kylie Jenner, but I think people are going to homogenize their look as well, because there is not as much value in diversity as you would think, because of just social media and sort of the dopamine effects of social media. So I think that we're going to see sort of a more homogenization, and the race conversation has to change, and it needs to change fast because it's old, you know, and for the most part,
not useful, you know.
Right. It's old, and it doesn't, and obviously the way that it's been had over and over and over and over and over and over and over again is not impacting it in an actionable way. Like it's not actually changing shit, because we're still talking about it. We're still talking about the same shit. And we're talking about that, which is why I started the book gang, which is also why I started the think tank. Like all of these things I'm doing as a result of like feeling a level of frustration with the conversations that I find myself in, or that I find other people having on very, very high levels. You know, like I ran a think tank with a friend of mine, Rasu, over at NYU for the tech department of Afrotectopia or something. And it was great. But what I had noticed was everybody in there was a person of color in tech. I mean, there were obviously some white people there too, but for the most part, it was just all like people of color in tech. all of them were talking about like racism or sexism. And I'm like, yo, the fact that we're having this conversation shows how far we have not come as a people. Because if we had this same conversation 20 years ago if we had the same conversation 20 years ago in NYU, we would be talking about race and sexism. And if we had this conversation 40 years ago, we would be talking about race and sexism. And if we had this conversation 60 years ago, we probably wouldn't be at NYU having this conversation. We'd be somewhere else, but it would be about race and sexism. If we had this conversation 80 years ago, race and sexism. Like it's always the same fucking conversation, which means we need to change this up because obviously it's not working. And we're in a position where we're talking about tech. Yo, you guys are the users and the builders. Like now we have to like switch it up because I know what I was asked to research around with CRISPR and automation and augmentation. And in a minute, race is not going to be a part of the conversation. You'll be like, race? What? I changed my race. Last week I was this. And especially when you're operating through a digital space, because you literally can change how you appear. Right? Yeah. So they're gonna be like, what are you talking about? And and rightfully so. And you're going to be still pissed because you're like experiencing the world as a black, brown, Latinx, whatever individual. And they're going to be like, I was that last week. Wasn't so bad. And they're going to be like, fuck, I don't got no legs because they're really switching up the game. And I mean, obviously that's a hyper exaggeration, but not that crazy.
No. I had this dumb idea. And I didn't know if I wanted to try to actually make it as an app or make it as like a parody sort of, Saturday Night Live thing. But it was called Beer Goggles. And what it was essentially like a version of the Snapchat glasses that put like Facetune filters over whoever you wanted. So essentially you could be in a bar rocking your glasses and make whatever girl you left with look exactly like you wanted them to look like, as long as you never took the glasses off, because the AR reality is there, right? People are doing face swaps and all this stuff now. So you could theoretically just be like, I want every girl to look like this and experience the world in probably an extremely happy way, because to you, you're like, oh yeah, she's a bad one that I went. It won't matter what the reality is in a minute, because we will be able to, at least in a very short term, lay over. And I guess we've always been doing this, but now we're doing it outside of our brains and bodies, but laying over our own version of the world, of reality, as we see fit. And I do think that that'll definitely change those sort of conversations, or at least make them even less valid, because it does feel like sometimes online we spend so much time chasing this weird, these cultural appropriation conversations and all this sort of stuff. And it's just like, yo, like that is, you're having a conversation about something that not only you didn't make up, you are coming in, you are a cultural appropriator, right? Like right. Motherfuckers we weren't at in the South Bronx when 4 or 5 people came up with these ideas when it comes to hip hop, right? Everything that we've learned, everything that the generations after us have learned, it's all come from us seeing something in the culture that we enjoyed and then putting it on, trying it on until it fit us right. The same way that you see the Kylie Jenner's homegirls rocking cornrows or something like that. Like they're trying on something to see if it fits them correctly. And then eventually you settle on this sort of version of yourself, or this idea of yourself. But we're always doing that. All of us are, it's hard to say that anybody came up in an era where you were rocking something that was not culturally necessarily yours, but 100%. You rocked it until it made sense, and then it became a part of what you were culturally, because you've been rocking it for so long, or you've been doing the it's like
I just saw a meme and it was like hella funny. It was like Dr. Umar talking about like who wasn't going to get reparations and who would, and it was like, if you don't live in a black community, you will not get reparations, and if you wear a weave, perm or any other type of appropriation of European hairstyle, you will not get reparations. But the whole time, this nigga got a bow tie on and a white dress shirt. And I'm like, yo, my G.
Yeah.
First of all, one, who made you the gatekeeper of reparations? And number two, what reparations? Where are those at? And number three, how you going to sit here and talk about appropriating white culture and you sitting here wearing a dress shirt and a bow tie? Like, some of the most pro-black, Malcolm looked amazing. Malcolm wore a suit immaculate, a European cut suit. Fantastic. He looked amazing, right? So I'm 100% from that space. Like, Wu-Tang is my favorite. There's nobody in all of Wu-Tang is appropriation. The whole shit, right? Like, I love Wu-Tang. That shit is all appropriation. And if it was and if it wasn't, I don't know if I would love it. You know what I'm saying? Because it spoke to me in so many ways. There wasn't nobody in the hood. Like, I think we were probably like the last generation that got like kung fu flicks. You know what I'm saying? Like,
straight up on network television.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying? Like, but there was nobody. We all loved that shit, and all of breakdancing was an appropriation of kung fu flicks and kung fu moves. Like, that shit was. It's all there, right? So I don't really know what type of information. All information is appropriated in some way, shape, or form, right? Because it's shared and then it's articulated in a way that you chose to articulate it. So I don't know. It's like, this is part of that shit with me where I'm like, yo, at some point we got to really, really look at what actually matters, you know, and think in terms of what matters so that we can take issue with what is of value and what isn't, because otherwise it gets cloudy and now I don't want to hear you talk, right? It's like you was yelling. It's that cry wolf shit. It's like, yo, you was yelling the whole time. You've been yelling about somebody calling you a name and you mad about this or you mad about that or someone stole this. And it's like, but when shit really hits the fan and then you start crying, it's like it's at the same volume as all that other shit you was crying about, but that shit really wasn't valuable. It wasn't really real. Like, and this is like something that you should actually be huffing and puffing, screaming about and being upset about, but it's not landing the same because you've already clouded the conversation with all this other noise. So, I mean, again, that's really all I'm trying to do is because I don't think that the reason why I'm trying to do the book gang or why I wanted to create a book gang was because I wanted people, one, I don't want to feel so lonely. You know what I'm saying? Like, just in these conversations, that's real. Yeah. That's real. Like, and I don't like the feeling of having to wait for people to catch up to understand concepts so I can present my ideas, because I need them to be at like a certain space to even be able to hear my idea without them feeling like offended or like they're not being heard or that like, so that's sort of like part of it was that. And then the other part of it is really to get us out of this space where we can recognize like we need to sort of become more anti-fragile, you know, and be able to have the hard conversations without the emotion. So that like, we just need to be able to play better chess. And so that was like the book gang, because the book gang is sort of something that's open to like pretty much anybody and everybody, and we can share and, you know, we can sort of learn how a lot of people that are signed up, you know, don't really read that much, but, you know, want to get more into it. So it's something that's a little bit diverse, but they can be privy to conversations, and we do sort of like webinar, Zoom, things like this, where people can sort of jump in and out, and we can, you know, how
do you think, it's funny because you were, you know, even in talking about that, talking about the book gang and talking about keeping connected, like Zoom seems like it's about to have a whole new sort of renaissance post all of this, because it's created such a very interesting, it seems super basic, but it's just created this easy way in which everybody can kind of stay in tune and share ideas and be in these not always have to be just live, whether it be like Instagram live and things like that. And I'm wondering if we get a lot more of these sort of siloed conversations that can actually lead to some real progress happening because of, oddly enough, apps like what we're on right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that this is more impactful than we understand, because I think people are going to be turning to the individuals that are capable to have these conversations in a concise manner. And you're going to be looking for new individuals to lead the sort of the information age and lead the conversation. I just had this conversation with my brother, and I was like, look, we might lose a bunch of money in the market, and you might, who knows? But the one thing we do know is that we're moving in the information age. And the one thing that we do have is a lot of information. Yeah. Right. So like between you and I, in our worlds, we really are a wealth of information, and we can leverage that moving forward. And so I do think like, Zoom and oddly enough, like Twitch and the gaming services and all of these things that have been like the streaming services, YouTube streaming, IG Live, I think that people are understanding and realizing really quickly, like, oh, there's something else going on here. You know what I'm saying? Like there's something else that we can tap into, and that we need to tap into and need to examine. Like I changed my whole world is different now as a result of this. Like my setup, I'm looking at, I got a couple of ring lights over here.
I see him in the eyes.
Yeah. These are blue block. I don't wear glasses. These are like the blue light blocking glasses.
Yeah.
I'm trying, but my vision is perfect, brother.
No, mine is not, but it's all right.
2015. But listen, you're stronger as a result because you took those lumps. and that was real shit. You were.
Oh yeah, there's that. But yeah. So to end this,
I just want to say though, I do think that the book gang is like step one for me to sort of like putting myself out there, in terms of sort of like gathering sort of people together. And it's small, like right now, like a couple hundred people signed up. I'm sure that 1% of those people will be active, you know what I mean? Or 2%, which is fine. But I think that that's a really good sort of stepping stone into like these sort of conversations where we can have like and present broader ideas of mental flexibility and, critical thinking, so that you can know how to respond to certain things and what actually is of value and what isn't of value. Which also the podcast, I'm reintroducing the podcast, and that's,
I was about to say, finally bring it.
Yeah,
back.
It's really important. And I think that I was reluctant for a really long time because of my own insecurities and not wanting to present myself as an authority in any sort of way, shape, or form of anything. Because I genuinely am really just more curious than I am an expert at anything, like I'm really just like I'm really an expert in curiosity. But I realized that it's a good space to sort of have these conversations with people who might be more impactful to the listener than me. You know what I'm saying? Like I do have access to experts, and I think that, that's a good opportunity for me to sort of get people exposed. And also, again, leverage myself as a person who can actually interview individuals who are of interest to me and also of interest to the sort of general conversation. I do want to work on that. And then the third thing, what I'm really, really gearing for is I'm doing all of those things to push towards a real strong, like a really, really strong think tank space where we're taking the best of those individuals who shine through and cut through, and taking those and putting them on projects and giving them source material to research and saying, here, we need to put out a paper on CRISPR that speaks to our community. Right. And so that, and having, some really high level individuals that come from the community or that can talk to the community do so, because that's not happening. And that for me is super concerning, because I've been involved in a few different think tanks, and they're all tech initiated and all West Coast tech stuff, but it's all based on society, where we're going, and we're all presenting reports and we're writing and we're doing these things. And I am usually one of, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 people involved. And I'm usually like maybe one or two of color. And I'm usually the only non sort of Ivy League person, like involved. If sometimes there's people that aren't even like, didn't even go to college necessarily, but they're just like tech entrepreneurial geniuses. But I realized that I've never been invited to a think tank other than the one at NYU that was run by a woman of color. But I've never been invited to think tanks by people of color. I've never seen the paper reports from think tanks from people of color, particularly of like the hip hop community or the community, like, like a youth movement community. It's like, if they're doing it for a reason, right? If there's a think tank that the Rockefeller Foundation is put together, and it's releasing a report, and that report has a 10-year, sort of like a 10-year window scenario on it. They're doing that for a reason. And whatever reason they're doing it, we need to be doing it for a reason too. Like, we need to be right there in that conversation, and we're not. So I was like, you know what? For a long time, I was like, what the fuck are we doing? Like, I get into that mode where I'm like, yo, we ain't doing shit. Like, I'm not fucking with us. I don't fuck with black people. I don't fuck with brown people. That's it. I'm done. I don't fuck with white people. I don't fuck with black people. I don't fuck with nobody. And then I'm like, yo, we're not doing it because I didn't do it. Like, I should just do it. You know what I'm saying? Like, at some point I got to sort of own it and stop waiting for somebody else to do it. So that's really what I'm pushing. And you can edit all this shit out if you want or not. But
I think it's important. I think it's because I do think it circles back to the entire conversation that we're having, where it's dangerous to not have these conversations and to not even be thinking about these things, right? There are the Aspen Institute. There are so many places that are organizing around really large ideas for society as a whole, or very specifically for countries, whatever else. Building these think tanks, building these sort of cabals of captains of their respective industries and all this sort of stuff. And it makes no sense that hip hop isn't taking an initiative to do it now, especially with this striation of people that are making money. But also just even, black intellectuals, all of that, like, there should be these real, like you said, like, the fact that, what's the name of the joint? I know, the think tank that crafts all of the conservative bills, ALEC.
Oh, ALEC,
right?
Yeah.
Right? You're like, that's just money and people with time and the will to want to do those things. That can happen now. That isn't no longer an option or opportunity, right? Like Puff, Jay, whoever, you can have Byron Allen, you can have people that can put up $1 million, $10 million, do research, do whatever to find out, when we have this conversation about reparations, and, it would be so much better to be able to come to the table and be like, here, this is an 18-month study that we just did with these doctors, these people, and these historians, and we came up with this. Here's the plan, and present it to Congress. And then they take that and then they vote on it. Like, that is how all this other stuff, these bills are coming from people who have spent the time to do the research, bogus or not, right? Like, you obviously have sugar lobby and bullshit lobbies that come up with their bullshit studies, but this is where that those conversations need to go when we talk about being able to really influence power and really to change systematic racism and the bullshit that happens, a lot of times it has to do with just simply the fact that no one's coming with real information. They're coming, like you said, in a situation where it's like you're expecting somebody else to do the work for you. And
I mean, that's also part of the problem with intellectualism anyway, and the gatekeepers around it, because it's all coming out of academia, right?
Yeah.
And if it's all coming out of academia, then it's all, for the most part, liberal and liberal left, and also super emotional. And it's not, and that financing is based on what academia approves. And then, you know what I'm saying? Or the financing is based on what industry approves within academia, and academia doesn't want to go against industry because the industry is financing all of it. So it's really, really important that it's independently funded, which is ironically how Jeffrey Epstein was able to get into the circles that he was getting into, because he was privately funding all sorts of shit within these sort of communities, and he was able to get so close to all these other individuals, which put him in a position where he could leverage what he knew and whatever against those people, because the sciences are so fragile because of their dependency on academia. So they're easily infiltrated. So it's like, I never thought about how we would fund it or what it would look like, but I definitely thought in terms of like what these reports and the value of these reports have to corporations, and what the value of those reports would then have to politicians. But I'm uninterested in serving the current political sort of structure. It just seems way too antiquated and it's over. Like I'm hoping that this is also the end of the political structure as we've experienced it, because it's really not productive. Like, we really need to move into a more technocratic era. And I understand what that looks like. I understand that the fear around that, but I also understand the damage around not moving into that space when the whole world is already there. You know, like we're inevitably, I mean, there's a real, I mean, I'll try to make this quick so that you can wrap up, but there's a real problem with us trying to retard the technological development of sort of our society. Yeah. You know, so when people are talking about, like, you know, we don't know what the dangers of 5G are, and we don't know, it's like, yeah. No shit. That you're right. You're absolutely right. We don't know what the dangers are, but we still have to roll it out because we cannot afford to lose this situation. And it's like almost like where you don't know. We know there's enough of the damages with not being in front of 5G and not having 5G. We can totally look at those in real time and know that it's way more damaging to not have this thing roll out in the way that it needs to roll out if everybody else is rolling it out.
Yeah.
You know, like, yeah, obviously if nobody's rolling out, we don't like, then there's no race to the future, right? Like, we don't have to worry about it. But if it's rolling out and happening, you're not going to like impede it because you're scared, right? It would be like me impeding my nieces from learning the alphabet as they get to like C, because I'm afraid of the possibility that they might read something that damages them.
Yeah.
It's like, no, that's not a healthy way of dealing with progress, right? Like, I can anticipate that they're going to learn the fucking alphabet and they're going to read some horrible things, but hopefully along that path, I'm going to, you know, do the best that I can to equip them with what they need to be equipped with.
Yeah, be ready for the thing you know is going to happen. Stop,
right.
not slow it down.
But I can't possibly test all the scenarios, and I can't possibly slow down the train, right? So if I do know of some damaging shit that's about to happen, like, yeah, it's going to take out 10% of the population because, you know, they're going to be affected by the radiation, the new radiation and their bodies aren't adjusted to it yet. It's almost like, yeah, but if I don't do it, then 100% of the population is going to be affected by what I don't do. And I think that like, we wouldn't stop ourselves from learning how to read because we would be fearful of what we're going to read. You know, like that's not a good way of addressing the progress and the problems with progress. It's like a lot of times the problems have to be addressed as they arise, and you have to deal with it because you're going. You know, like you're in it. Like you're not gonna. I mean, you were literally an Olympic runner. You're not gonna stop and tie your shoes in the middle of the race. You're going to fucking race till those fucking shoes fall apart or fall off. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, you have to learn how to adjust in the moment. And I think that is hopefully what I think is happening. It was so funny. I was talking to somebody, and I'm sure you know this as well. It's just like the first even couple days that all this stuff happened, everybody was sort of freaking out about it. And I remember being like so calm and normal because I was like, I've been a starving artist before. I know what it's like when you're just like, okay, so those bills just aren't getting paid because I have $5 in my bank account. And I was like, all right, I know this feeling. I'm back here. But the weird thing is now everybody is here.
Right.
You know? And I do think that that ultimately you're right. There's something that is going to come out on the other end of this. As a whole, preparedness for a very different world and to not be so reliant on things like, you know, China basically exporting all of our medical supplies, things like that. But it's so important what you said before is like, it's not just on somebody else anymore to be vigilant about what is going to happen to you, people close to you, your larger sort of community that you care about. And that coming out of this, it is really important that you also take the steps that are necessary to make sure if something like this, worse, whatever happens again, that you're prepared, but also whatever is going to change in the future, that people are paying attention. So I'm glad that you're doing that. And I hope that people hopefully are inspired and also take their steps, what little they can do to sort of do that.
Yeah, I will say this: fiat currency is done. It's done.
It's very interesting.
Pay attention to what's going on with the cryptocurrencies if you can. I mean, I don't know what it looks like. I have all my alarms set and I try to buy a Bitcoin when it's on the low. And you do not have to buy a whole Bitcoin. That is something that like mad people keep hitting me. They're like, it's so expensive. I'm like, yo, you can literally buy $1 worth of Bitcoin. And if that Bitcoin goes up, or Zcash or Zcoin or whatever it's called, like there's a lot of cryptocurrencies. Fiat currency is done. There's some really interesting. I'm going to send you a bunch of podcasts and articles and interviews and stuff right now. But there's some really, really interesting shit. But essentially that's what the book gang is. It's like, you know, it's not just books. It's also just general information, like getting into the habit of sort of diving in and digesting information. So I'll send you a bunch of links.
Definitely
add them to the show notes if you want.
Thank you. Yeah, for sure. I just want to leave with one last question because we didn't even we touched on it a little bit, but obviously, you know, the podcast is Think Like a Rapper now. And I wanted to just lastly get sort of, if in any way, hip hop or growing up in the culture has prepared you at all for this moment in any way. And if not, maybe the other sort of the general question is, what have you learned from the culture that you use every day?
I mean, I think a lot of my education is from hip hop, right? Like I just happened to be interested in the hip hop that was like super pro, like, well, honestly, my father would only really let me listen to like Public Enemy and certain shit, you know, like, so even though I wanted to listen to everything when I was super, super young, my dad was sort of just like filtering what I was able to listen to. And I think that also helped me have like a a foundation that was a little bit more, that was a little bit sort of more curated.
Yeah.
So and then also to me, my favorite rappers were always like smart. They were just like smarter than the other rappers because the wordplay was better. My dad also, my mom and my dad also like were both educated in terms of like constantly reading. And so they made me read a lot, so that it was my love affair with hip hop was always based around like words, like, and how people put together ideas through the use of those words. So hip hop was like really, really informative for me growing up and like how I wanted to articulate. And then when I obviously started writing music, I wanted to not only sound smart, but also like, and be smart, but I wanted like it to sound good. So cause I really felt like, if I can make this shit sound cool and look cool, I can get across really smart ideas, like almost hidden, like I can like backdoor them into like, I can just like, so that was part of like, to me, part of like growing Game Rebellion and growing Afropunk was creating a way for me to like slide in these complex ideas into sort of simple rhyme forms, which is why I love like Jay-Z so much. And I just like, this dude is just incredible at like putting together like ideas and then delivering them in a way that makes me want to deliver them as well, and then Rick Ross, you actually, I think, were the first person that really tried to put me on like, Rick Ross actually is an amazing fucking rapper. And then a friend of mine was dating him for a second, and she's wild smart. Yeah. And I was like, what the fuck, you dating Rick Ross? And she was like, you don't fuck with Rose? The dude's a fucking genius, yo. She's like, for real. Like, and I was like, for real? Like, if you think that, okay, let me see what's up. And then I learned about all his business ventures and all this shit. And then I was like, oh, okay. She was like, you and him would be like really, really like good friends. Like, you need to, like, I need to introduce y'all type shit. So I got into like, I started like really, I always liked people, liked who I liked, but I was quick to sort of like push certain people aside because I didn't really fuck with their content. You know what I'm saying? Like, I was like, oh, I don't fuck with it. Like, I remember like 96 when Reasonable Doubt dropped, like and everybody was going crazy. I just didn't want to fuck with it just because of who was going crazy off of it. I was like, I don't fuck with you. Y'all are dumb. Like, so that music must be dumb. But I was dead wrong, right? I learned it very quickly that I was dead wrong. Like it didn't take me a long time to be like, oh, this is amazing, like actual amazing. So hip hop completely influenced me in terms of even my own growth and education and wanting to be smart, and also not wanting to be like obviously Nas was a genius, like, and wanting to be a part of those conversations and a part of like not just turning it over to sort of like whoever was hot and like but I was like, I wanted to be defiant, but I also wanted to be right. And I grew up during that hip hop, like the Malcolm X hat, the X hat. Oh yeah, era.
X hat era.
So I grew up in the X hat era. So it was like, it wasn't just enough to just like be listening to hip hop. I wanted to be like walking and talking, and I wanted to be defiant, but I definitely wanted to be smart. So I mean, and also the 5% raised me. So that's
I love that. Hip hop. I love that. How do you feel about what are your thoughts on the JLEC album?
JLEC is my brother. You trying to box me into in the corner?
Of course, what are you talking about?
He's your brother too. I know.
Yeah.
I first of all, I find the JLEC album very. It was such an interesting time that it was released, like, because it was like the beginning of this quarantine. So you're like just sitting there like, yo, I don't got nothing to do but dissect this album. And I have some issues with mix stuff because it's just my, like that's the shit that I'm into. And also I have issues with hip hop mixes in general. Overall, the like what's being said and like the lyrics on that album, like people need to really, really dive in and listen and like listen to what's being said and what he's saying. Even what like even what the interludes, like the interludes are alluding to, and like it's a very on purpose album, you know?
Yeah, it is not haphazard in any way. I don't know why people I think people maybe haven't listened to enough underground hip hop, whether it be like Madlib albums or Doom, MF Doom albums, to kind of like get the structure of it. But man, yeah, to me, there's a whole lot of purpose behind it. And I even, oddly enough, only like the way that it's mixed simply because of his ability to get Jay on it. It's like he really executed the dream that Jay, put in everybody's head, where he was talking about, he would rap like Talib Kweli. And it's just like, no, now you're going in. Like you showed up to this joint ready to go in a very different way that I think people that don't know about, let's say, his relationship with like Malachi York or stuff like that, like he got a chance to, I think, get back to like 88 J in a new way.
Yeah, I mean, I think this album also is going to be one of those albums that takes some time, sort of like how American Gangster. Mm-hmm. It took time for people to understand like what was going on. Like, I think this album has that sort of feel to me. Whereas like Watch the Throne hit like immediately. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Like, and because it was just like, it felt like the moment, you know what I'm saying? And I think that this album isn't about the moment. And like, and sometimes when you're making something, you're making something like you're making something as like a mirror, you know what I mean? To sort of like reflect, or it's like you put on an outfit to like make sense and fit in the room. And then somebody shows up in the room and puts on an outfit to not make sense in the room. You know what I mean? Like, and Jay Electronica has always been that person, like he's always been the person. And I don't think it's always been on purpose. It's just who he is, like he kind of comes in and he impacts the room in a different way. And I think that the thing that's been nice about Hove and Jay's relationship is that Hove made space for Jay to be Jay. You know what I'm saying? In an industry that doesn't really have a place for Jay Electronicas. Yeah. It's like, so Hove gave him a really amazing platform and a really amazing space. And shout out to Law and Hove and Emery and Jay Elect and all the fam over there, Rock Nation and Tata. But I think that they really, really allowed Jay to be Jay Elect. And that wasn't really going to happen anywhere else, I don't think.
Yeah, no.
Maybe Puff would have let him do that because they're actually so close, like in terms of just their friendship. So maybe Puff would have allowed for that. But like the industry doesn't really allow for that. And I think that it's dope that he got with the gods in a way that it was allowed for that. But I do think that there's something, I think that this is the setup. Like, I don't think that, I think that this isn't it, right? Like, I feel like this is like, okay, let me get Hove on the project and it'll be a joint project. And that joint project will open some doors and allow people to recognize me that wouldn't normally recognize me, and remind some people like, oh, no, don't get it twisted. I'm still here. Like I'm present. And I think that there's something else. And I think there needs to be something else, particularly because Jay Elect wasn't able to capitalize on this project because of all that's going on right now. He wasn't able to capitalize on this project the exact way that he should. So I think that there needs to be a follow-up that is a compliment to this project in a way that when this is all said and done, like I don't think you should do it now, but when it's all said and done, I think that there needs to be something added to that he can then really capitalize on that product, on the project. I mean, he's got enough footage. I mean, there literally could be a fucking 45-minute documentary.
I mean, he's got, I mean, that's Jason Goldwatch stuff.
Jason Goldwatch documentary is fucking fantastic. I don't know where it's at. I don't know what the deal is, but I mean, it doesn't even need to be that. It could be a new one. It could be about like, it could literally be a collection of interviews of people talking about Jay Electronica, telling their stories about Jay Electronica, right? Like he's such an enigma and an interesting human being that it doesn't necessarily have to even be music per se. It can be something else. Like I've always said, I wanted Jay Electronica on my podcast, but not to talk about music. Like I'm uninterested in talking about music with Jay Electronica because there's so many more layers to him as a human being that I think make him so interesting and so that I'm so curious about. And I think more people need to understand that what makes him an amazing musician is not the music. It's all that goes on around the music. You know what I'm saying? Like, and the music is just the expression of this enigma of a human. So I'm interested to see what happens, and I'm interested to see how this album grows on people, because I think that it's a dense project.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing the because you got to think about the way we came up, and it's very interesting. It's going to hit everybody who's been waiting for him a long time very differently, but for a kid who's 15 years old, he never knew the first time, right? So this might send him back into the rabbit hole of not only learning about Jay Electronica, but trying to decipher the album at 15 or 16, and
I didn't even think about that.
What that becomes, because that kid never had the expectations, right? That person, they were 5 years old when Exhibit C came out. We don't have to worry about what they thought about that, right?
I don't even, honestly, I don't know what these kids, these generations are so different, like within 10 years, like 10 year to 10 year is very, very different. They're extremely different. So I don't even know if they're hearing this necessarily. Like if they're hearing the Jay Electronica album, or if it even matters if they're hearing it or not. But I will say, for people who do hear it and do decide to go down that rabbit hole, that shit's going to be crazy.
No, that's right. There will be at least one. And that's the thing I'm always interested in seeing, because that there's somebody who's sitting around, and the benefit, and we can end it here. I think the one benefit of it happening now is it forced everybody to slow the fuck down, where, you can't, I've talked to a bunch of people and they're like, the vices and habits that people have had just scrolling through the phone because it was like, well, this is just the thing to do and I'm at work and I got nothing to do. Once you have to do that for 8 hours a day because you're at home, you realize you need to do something else. And I think that having a record like that needs you to sit down for a little bit and listen to it, and then listen to it again, and then listen to it again a couple days later, hopefully we'll get ultimately, people to really sort of process the shit in a way that I think will resonate, like you said, for the long term.
At 100, and I'm definitely one of those individuals that I get locked in on a song and I just keep it on repeat. That's sort of like how I digest certain shit. Also, it's important for me because I use the music very specifically, because if not, then I'm not usually listening to music. Like I'm, like listening to podcasts or books on audio or reading or whatever. So when I am listening to music, it's for a very specific purpose to push me in a certain way. Usually it's like on a car ride where I'm actually feeling myself get tired. So I'm like, okay, off with the audiobook, on with something that's going to keep me fucking pumping, pushing. Or in my workouts, my workouts are very specific. And like my friends tease me because I used to listen to like really, really, and still do listen to like really slow jams during my workouts. Like they'd be like, I would listen to like fucking 90s R&B or like Ro James or some real R&B shit or slow music. And they're like, why the fuck are you listening to this? I was like, because I don't want all the extra hype. Like I want it to be, I want this experience to be real personal and real controlled and real, but when I do like turn up, I like tune in, and that Universal Soldier was my song for like turning up. Like for all my kettlebell swing workouts, I put Universal Soldier on and I'm like, I'm ready to go.
Man, awesome. Well, thank you for your time. I'll let you get back to the kettlebells. I'm mad I didn't bring mine out here, and I got to find one while I'm in California. But thank you again for your time.
Yo, no, absolutely, yo. It's lots of love, brother.
Peace.
Peace, yo.